Ye old Cleveland and top tier matchmaking. Anyhow, here today in what I hope to be, hope to have as my final game in the USS Cleveland, the Tier 8 American Tech Tree Light Cruiser. Here today on the map Trident, mode is Epicenter sadly, but we are fortunate enough to be top tier in 6 to 8 matchmaking. Up against an enemy Shokaku, Monarch Leon Fuso, so of these, the Fuso is surprisingly the most heavily armored with her 35mm midsection plating, and then Aiden, Irian, Pensacola, La Galissonière for the cruiser lineup, nothing particularly annoying there. The Irian is of course a Sverdlov class light cruiser, kind of a build on the Chapayevs, but this one's a Pan-Asian one, sorry. And then Akazuki, Vanklin, Skane, and a Gepard. So 3 destroyers without smoke, and then a Japanese gunboat. Now in this kind of matchmaking, of course, the Cleveland is very favored. With her excellent 12-gun setup, that Fuso that can fire upon me, for example, as well, with his 14-inch or 350mm shells, I can just ricochet off my 25mm bow, because I am top tier. Easily able to shred some planes or just drift into my orbit without me noticing really. Showing broadside at the moment, but the Cleveland has an excellent rudder shift, so I'm not too worried. And IFHE lets me punch straight through with my 1/5 penetration as a tier 8 light cruiser with 152s. So the USS Cleveland used to be a tier 6 prior to the line split, and then she became a tier 8. So at tier 6 she had a rather hefty hit point pool at about 33,000. Moving to tier 8 she only got about 3,000 hit points in compensation, but she did get much improved turret traverse, so her turret traverse is actually quite good now. Used to be quite sluggish at tier 6, artificially nerfed for balancing reasons. And her firepower, as you can see, as I put 9 shells into the Irian and get most of my HE pens, is quite fearsome with her 6.5 second reload. Range is middling at 15.8, or 15.6, sorry. But as a light cruiser, she can't operate effectively at long range anyway, thanks to the high arcing shells that you've been seeing me fire. This does, however, allow you to shoot over islands like this, where if I was playing something like a Chapayev, another very competitive tier 8 cruiser, but with flat Russian shell arcs, I wouldn't be able to arc this island shot and harass this Fuso, who has beached himself. Currently playing very safe in a position of cover. This is of course classic American cruiser gameplay. The Cleveland is no different. She has excellent gun angles, so you can actually angle quite well while bringing all 4 rifles to bear, or all 4 turrets rather, and all 12 rifles. However, in this kind of situation, I'm able to just go fully broadside and just comfortably harass the Fuso while I occupy the center. There's an enemy Gepard on the other side, looks like. I can't read it very clearly here. I might be wrong about the identity. It might be, in fact, a Skane, based on the length of the name. Spotted while firing, suggesting either a ship out here or a ship out here. But I'm not too concerned about that. Fuso cannot retaliate, he's reversing. I'm gonna start my engine just in case the Shokaku planes decide to go for me. You can see my 6.5 second reload is quite detrimental to this Fuso. Getting some shatters now on that 35mm midsection that I mentioned. But considering I set him on fire twice, thanks to my volume of shell fire rather than any kind of innate high fire chance, he should be going down quite shortly. Set another fire that's probably permanent, and my Shokaku's attacking him as well. And he finishes him off. Now as a kind of stop-and-go radar cruiser, with the standard light cruiser utilities, you do run propulsion module on Cleveland, so I'm able to start my engine quite quickly after being at full stop, as you can see. Trying to get some shots onto this La Galissonière from my very safe position. Looks like I'm under leading, or I just can't arc the island. Looks like maybe I was just not able to arc the island from that close-ish range. Enemy Monarch on the other side, but he's covered in 32mm armor. There's an Akazuki in smoke actually, and I might be able to borrow it. Yep, I'm able to borrow it and fire open water. Now it's not the well, I got one salvo off open water and concealment. You can see those excellent gun angles for that one salvo. It's not the Monarch I was after, however, but the Akazuki, who has drifted out of his smoke. Turning in, you have to be careful. Monarch appears to be firing HE, so I think I'm safe for now. Gonna duck back into cover. Don't want to go out into the open. I don't have a heal, so I still have to play with some caution. Gonna let this fire tick in case the Monarch hits me again, but I'm gonna continue to harass him for as long as possible. At this point, there's only 9 seconds on the fire, so no real point in damage controlling. I'll take the AR bonus. There's some planes on the border of my AAR, and you can see me shooting them down quite easily. The Cleveland has a fairly powerful tier 8 AA suite even without defensive fire and sectoring, especially if you spec the way I do. And add some additional DPS by taking BFT purely for AA purposes. Now, I wouldn't normally recommend taking BFT purely for AA purposes, but if you div with carriers quite a bit like I do, it's actually quite worth it, especially if you also enjoy the Cleveland to the extent that I do as well. Quite easily racked up 50k, very average result, perhaps even below average depending on your standards. The server average for the Cleveland is actually kind of surprisingly low, but that is because she is still relatively fragile, so it's easy to make mistakes. In this kind of top tier game though, you are basically a DPM god. Monarch is still continuing to shoot HE, so I'm not concerned at all. At most he'll deal maybe 5-6k to me, but as you can see I quickly accelerate out of the way anyway, without too much difficulty. Some AP from probably the Leon. Irian over here, pushing up, maybe a bit of a desperation play. Pushing in the Irian is not exactly a recommended behavior, spotted by the Skane. My last few shells arc over the mountain and put another 5.5k chunk into the Irian, just showing off the extremely impressive HE DPM. Oh, surprisingly he survives the rocket planes, so I guess I'll have to put another salvo into him. Didn't have a very clear line of sight, but I have a very fast reload. And my Cheshire is able to finish off the Irian. There's a deep water torpedoes from the Irian. He has a quint tube of 13.5 kilometer Yueyang DWTs on each flank of his ship. Now, I haven't been able to discuss the consumables or the excellent concealment of the Cleveland. The Cleveland is, of course, very competitive at 9.3, one of the best at the tier, competing basically with the Atago and Irian. You match the Atago, or sorry, did I say Irian? I meant the Atago and Edinburgh. Which allows you to get quite close and make use of your excellent consumable set, which includes a 9-kilometer light cruiser radar. Now, as I've mentioned multiple times, the shells are lazy and they arc quite a bit. Gonna pop my hydro here with so many destroyers in the vicinity. But because of the density of fire, 12 guns, and also the short reload of 6.5 seconds, you can quite easily adjust. Just have to angle for the Iden, and I should be safe to pick off any other targets I wish. Get set on fire by the Gepard, looks like. I don't really care, slowing down. I want this Skane kill, shift over to the Igla, or the Gepard, sorry, after. The Igla is in fact on my team. Now he has the HE damage saturation mechanic of the French, but because I'm a light cruiser, not a battleship per se, I'm just gonna stick with the HE and hammer him. Shoot off a volley at the Iden. He's dead now though. And now that just leaves a carrier hull. Oh shoot, there are some Gepard torps that I'm not going to be able to dodge. But I should be able to take one and survive. I probably had them spotted, to be honest, but I wasn't paying attention. You can see here the Cleveland has almost no torpedo bulge, so you do want to make use of your consumables to defend yourself when possible. Oh, I missed out on some Shokaku HP, unfortunately, because I'm a monkey clown. Maybe I should have just plowed into the torpedoes. But a fairly average 80,000 damage game while being top tier. Nothing to write home about in terms of just shy of 1700 experience. Put 150 shells, 9 planes shot down, 3 incaps, 3 ships destroyed, 5 fires, 6 defended ribbons, and 1 assisted capture. Detailed report wise, you'll see I shot basically mostly HE. This match I didn't reach for the AP at all. Now light cruiser HE is actually quite good, but when you're top tier like this and you have IFHE spect, well, you don't need to use it. And especially because moving from the Helena to the Cleveland, you have that full 32mm of penetration, you don't quite need to make use of the armor piercing as much. It's much easier to rely on the consistency of high explosive shell fire, which doesn't care about angling. So it looks like I do need a little more experience before I get to my Seattle. But anyway, consumable-wise, you should be running premium everything, but your priorities are damage control, then radar, then hydro, then defensive fire. And then module-wise, main armaments in slot 2, engine room. If you have a defensive fire, you could mount it if you want. Like I do mount a defensive fire module on my Montpelier, which is just basically just a premium clone of the Cleveland, if you look here. Although it has lost some efficacy. And then slot 3, mount main battery mod for Cleveland. You'll also note that on the premium Montpelier I mount ASM instead. But this is because the premium Montpelier has a 2.15 sigma instead of the standard 2.0 for cruisers at this tier. And so I want to emphasize that accuracy, whereas the Cleveland has a shorter reload. But standard sigma, so I just go for main battery mod to increase the traverse of the turrets. They are decent, but could still be improved further. Slot 4, as I mentioned in the commentary, propulsion module for that start-stop, and slot 5 concealment module is a must-have. Captain-wise, this is my dedicated Cleveland captain. And so I go for priority target, adrenaline rush, then demolition expert, then IFHE first, because you get up to 37mm of penetration with IFHE, thanks to the new 1/5 tier 8 and upwards HE penetration. And then after that, concealment expert, that's your basic 14-point build. From there you can build whatever you want. Now I opt for BFT plus expert loader plus preventative maintenance, BFT for the 10% AA purely only, and then I prefer these two over taking, say, Jack of all trades, because I like being able to reach for the AP when I want to. However, some other valid options are Superintendent for an extra radar charge and hydro charge, plus Last Stand, Superintendent plus Turret Traverse, Superintendent plus, as I mentioned, Jack of all trades, or even Vigilance, plus any 2-pointers or any particular 1-pointers of your preference. I would stay away from stuff like Survivability Expert and Basics. Basics you're not going to be burning, you're a cruiser. Survivability Expert is of questionable value at best. You could also opt for 2-2-1, so Last Stand plus Expert Marksman plus Preventive Maintenance, or Jack of all trades plus Expert Marksman plus Expert Loader, that kind of thing, but I think 3 plus 2 after the 14 points base is the preferred spec for most players. Anyhow, let's go into one more match. Maybe we can get into a bottom tier match to finish things up. But overall, the Cleveland is an excellent tier 8, especially for a tech tree ship. He's one of the more powerful ones. That 9.3 kilometer concealment combined with that excellent American light cruiser consumable set, and the excellent hull characteristics of maneuverability and handling outside of her rather low HP pool, and no heal, make her a very potent package. And this is of course coupled to her 12 152mm rifles, which with IFHE pen, 33mm of plate, which means you can tackle more or less any opponent that you can have thrown against you. She also has excellent AA. Once more, I'm top tier, so this should be interesting. This time the carrier is a tier 6. But it's two brothers, which is a bit of a messy map sometimes, shall we say. Anyhow, they have a North Carolina and Fuso as their only battleships. So Fuso, as I mentioned last game, you can bounce off your 25mm bow. North Carolina with her 16-inch or 406mm rifles, on the other hand, you cannot. However, with only one overmatch threat, you should be able to play fairly aggressively. Baltimore is your heavy cruiser cousin. Albemarle, the British heavy Amalfi, is actually a pretty tough matchup. Although Albemarle and Baltimore, you can beat quite handily in spite of the Albemarle's super heal. You just have a lot more raw DPM, so you should be able to win most fair trades. Helene is interesting, your lower tier cousin. If she takes IFHE, she can pen up to 31mm of plate, and you're covered in 25, so he does quite a bit of damage. However, his reload is significantly longer at about 8 seconds. Or was it 8.5? Kind of struggling to recall. So in spite of him having more raw guns, you have much faster reload. And you have somewhat superior gun angles and definitely superior concealment, so you should be able to take engagements as you wish, and then a Devonshire is just a tier 6. British heavy, so nothing to worry about. Low DPM, has a heal, nothing else. Silly Wangi is it's an Ognavoy, but it's Pan-Asian, so it has hydroacoustic and deep water torpedoes. Now, I'm not a destroyer, so deep water torpedoes are still something that can hit me, so I do have to be careful. In the distance, there's also a Farragut, Gepard, and Vestaris. You see the Farragut on the edge of my range. I'm not going to bother opening up, because I want to know where the North Carolina is first. My Benson's smoking up into the cap. Normally kind of unwise, but considering that I'm behind him along with an Iden, we can take use of this situation and borrow the smoke screen. So I'm going to adjust my angle and plunge aggressively into the cap. Remember, I have that 9km American light cruiser radar. So I'm watching my minimap as I close the distance. I'm already smoked, leading speculatively with my first 2 guns. He's already in radar range, but I'm not going to radar until he leaves concealment range. You can see my Benson is outspotting him right now. A little underled. You can see those slow arcing shells. Gonna wait for my reload to approach. Oh, no, he got respotted. And now he ducked into cover, but I have my radar to pierce that at this point. Get blind fired by the Albemarle. I can respect that. You can see my signature within the smoke of 12 rifles gives a quite distinct silhouette, so I'm actually quite easy to hit if I sit still. My radar's still lighting up the Albemarle temporarily. He's bowing now, miniaturizing or minimizing his cross section, but you can see with 12 rifles it doesn't really matter. And I can use my Benson's smoke to stay quite safe. I didn't pop my hydro because I'm not afraid of any Farragut torpedoes because of the short range, but the Albemarle actually has a quite powerful 10km quad set per side. Sticking with my HE, you can see him shattering some of my shells on his 40mm midsection plate. But if I just aim for superstructure up there, I get much less shatters. Again, he's blind firing me. There's a Devonshire as well, and apparently an Amalfi, so we do have to be careful. I continue to blind fire. We do want to finish off the target. He's giving a bit of broadside, so here would have been a nice spot to switch to AP. I'm going to switch to AP now, and there are those torpedoes that I mentioned. I don't know if I can sit him at this range, so I'm just going to go for upper superstructure. He turns out and away. Gonna have to thread these. That should be quite good to finish him off at this point. Quickly dodge those. Note that the Edinburgh must have re-smoked here, otherwise they would have shorted. However, he kind of fucks up when he's dodging the torpedoes. I have to bring my turrets around after the torpedo beat, but this Devonshire at this point is just meat. Amalfi is actually a tough opponent for me, so I would prefer not to engage him openly. He has much better open water performance because he has fast rail shells, whereas I have slow American shells. Again, because my guns are desynced, my front and back guns, I have to fire this out. Expert loader wouldn't help when I have half a salvo loaded, but it is enough to dispatch. But I empty the barrels anyway, so I'm going to fire off at the Amalfi and approach the cap at this point. We've slaughtered 3 ships on our side, but it's best to just take the cap and take our prize. North Carolina's sitting in the middle of the map, surprisingly. Malfi disengages himself, but it's actually probably better for me if instead of pushing through, I go reinforce the D side after taking the cap. Frankly speaking, my Benson probably should have gone into this cap a little bit earlier, but it's alright. His spotting was definitely very helpful. Firing a shot here because the Amalfi is still in smoke, so I'm going to be completely concealed. My smoke firing range is an excellent 5.6 kilometers. And just like that, we take a cap and have collected 2 kills. Not the highest damage, but we've destroyed a destroyer and a tier 8 cruiser, as well as a tier 6 on this side, so some fairly good work. Enemy team dispatching my teammates on this side. Baltimore leading a quite hefty push, followed by Helena and Fuso, without too much resistance. The Mogami and more importantly, my North Carolina not offering much resistance. Silly Wangy Torps heading toward the North Carolina, but they range out. The fact that the enemy North Carolina, the only overmatched threat to me in this match, is sitting here allows me to continue to play very aggressively. I'm going to cross the map and meet this push. The Fuso I'm not afraid of at all because I can actually ricochet his 350mm shells off my bow as long as I angle, so it's just the Helena and Baltimore, the combined HE/AP threat of the Baltimore's super heavy American AP with the improved bounce angles. My team pushing through, somewhat unwisely. It's just one North Carolina, yes, but it's still a North Carolina, which means he will eat you alive, especially if you're a 25mm plate, or sorry, 26mm plate Queen Elizabeth that only does 23 knots. Might be able to fire at him through this channel. Nope, looks like he's too far forward. I'm going to continue forward toward my goal. Don't care about that North Carolina. Yes, he has a lot of HP I could farm, but it's more important to win this match. Baltimore gets dispatched by my NCal, so he puts in some work finally. Still plenty of HP on that Fuso to farm. But I'm going to advance forward into the cap zone and make sure we secure this capture point. American light cruisers with their excellent consumable set are extremely powerful at exerting influence, especially because they back up that excellent consumable set with the massive firepower of 12 IFHE equipped 152mm rifles. You can see my speed, in terms of raw speed, is not the greatest, unlike some of the faster cruisers at this tier, like the Amalfi, that does 35, and the Arago, which does 36. The Cleveland does a rather pedestrian 33 knots. So she does pay for her immense firepower and utility in some of her raw stats. Opening up on the Fuso at my maximum range. Now there's a silly Wangy I could be firing at, but I don't really care about him that much. Helena returning fire upon me. Somehow he's not spotted while doing so, which is annoying. Set a fire on the Fuso immediately. He's returning fire. But I can easily dodge his shells. Send some shells onto the Helena. 1, he doesn't heal. And 2, he actually has a lot more firepower than the Fuso effectively. Fuso giving me broadside, but remember I set that fire. I'm gonna go for my fire first. Put 2 salvos into the Helena. Is it gonna be enough to dispatch him? Yes, it is. Fuso fires, and at 10 kilometers it's fairly easy for me to use my good rudder shift to angle, and I can ricochet the majority of the shells off my bow, as you saw. Now underneath 10 kilometers, your AP is worth using. He's pretty broadside. I'm gonna fire off 1 more front gun salvo, and then I'm gonna angle in. I would have liked to fire all my rifles, but angling is more important than dealing damage. However, he's turning away, so the AP I loaded is likely to do nothing, so I aim a little high, trying to get my AP into his superstructure then, and while I nail him for 1 over penetration and a bunch of ricochets. However, if he angles like this, he won't be able to bring most of his rifles to bear, which means I can quite safely farm him with HE. You can see quite a few shatters for a tier 6 battleship, and that is of course because of that 35mm deck, as well as the relatively minor superstructure. Actually, now that I think about it, versus the Fuso got massively nerfed by the IFHE changes, bouncing some more shells off his bow, by the way, because I have 37mm of penetration as opposed to my former 33, which means I actually do pen that 37mm section, or 35mm section. A little bit of a higher score than last time in terms of damage, but I've fired less shells overall, which tells you immediately that more of my damage is coming from fire damage. Again, not too many opportunities to demonstrate the AP when I'm top tier, because there's just no reason to reach for it. All of the targets that I'm shooting at are fairly susceptible to my high explosive. And in this case, well, they kind of folded fairly easily, was able to make use of a smokescreen laid down by my allied Benson. People asking where is the CV? Well, he's obviously quite back here. Or apparently he's on this side, so he's up here then. Amalfi on the edge of my range. He too has no heal, so he's been taking damage throughout the match, so gets quickly dispatched. I'm in no position to contest the carrier, so at this point I can take my hands off the keyboard. I will steer toward my North Carolina, but a tier 6 carrier is not going to be doing anything. And probably before we spot out the Ryujo, thanks to the Ryujo's very stealthy hull, this game's going to time out as we have gained control of all 4 capture points. Now the Cleveland is definitely a keeper, in my opinion, one of the strongest texture tier 8s. The Seattle comes after is a ship that I find many people struggle with now. It's been a long time since I've played the Seattle. I think I did my grind over a year and a half ago at this point. So it'll be interesting to revisit her and see what she's like in the modern metagame. Now she has gained some advantages in terms of being able to pen 37mm plate, but these are relatively marginal advantages. More or less. It's basically only ships like with very niche armor, like the Fuso, which detriment from this change. Whereas the IFHE changes also mean she's lost a bit of her fire chance. 7,000 experience, I needed what, 9k I think? This was enough to net 1856 in terms of base experience, in spite of the North Carolina getting 1 more kill, so it kind of informs you as to experience distribution. I have a chunk of experience on some destroyers, mostly bottom tier ships though, so I'm actually kind of surprised that I'm still top tier, so maybe he just purely did some very low HP kills. Again, mostly HE, and 16-9, the 9 is the important number because that is the number I need to research the Seattle. I am currently a bit too poor. No, I'm not too poor to buy a Seattle. So that's lovely. While I'm grinding, it will be a primary ship. But anyhow, I guess that's a wrap on the Cleveland herself, which means I can take off my grind camos. You do, of course, get a free perma camo for the Cleveland from the collection, but I find it to be gaudy, and I happen to own the old perma camo on the Cleveland, so that is my preferred Cleveland camouflage of choice. Strip off my grind stuff. No need to fear detonations anymore. And my Cleveland captain will return to her place on the Montpelier. And yes, I do enjoy the Cleveland to the extent that I own a premium clone, which is basically exactly the same. Don't at me. Anyhow, all that said, we only had 2 top tier games, so unfortunately I was unable to show off the Cleveland in a bottom tier game in commentary, but rest assured, this combination of firepower and concealment is still very, very fearsome, even when in 8 to 10 matchmaking. It's just your fragility means you have to play in a more careful fashion. In the past 2 games, you were able to see me push quite aggressively and without really thinking about my positioning too much. But when you're bottom tier, you do have to be a little more aware. Anyhow, that'll be all for now. I hope you enjoyed this just brief revisit to the Cleveland, and I will catch you all later with probably some carrier games firstly, but also with some gameplay in the Seattle once I get some of her modules. Cheers.